Welcome back. So we've all heard that happiness is an inside job, right? And that in keeping with the topic of pride, we have decided to take some time out to discuss what self-pride means to us and how this can cultivate an attitude of contentment without having to seek it externally. So I'd love to know from both of you, what does self-pride mean?
Look, I think I've expressed it in a couple of ways. And one of the ways as a chef for me is being proud not only of my heritage, so much so that I show it in my food.
Yes.
There's a lot of chefs in the world everywhere, but I like to specialize in Afrofusion because I feel like our food has so much of a story to tell. And I'm not just talking about South African food, I'm talking about food throughout the continent of Africa. So that's one of the ways I express my pride in my culture, my heritage, my identity through the food, because I get to share with people what we get to enjoy as a continent. And then people then realize how amazing African cuisine actually is.
Yes, oh, that's beautiful to me. And for you, Doctor?
What works for me is sort of going back to my roots in whatever area. So, for example, in the intellectual space, so for me, it was a huge difference. I did some research on the intellectual heritage, particularly of the Eastern Cape, but which is of Africa.
Yes.
And to discover so much that was done back in the 1800s, 1900s, and a lot of it is what we are still trying to do now. That really boosted me and my pride in a positive way.
Yeah.
And that research became, it turned into a documentary, which was done by a former colleague of mine, Dr. Alet Skoen. And we documented that, and then we showed it to our students. And also I could see what it did to them, because they kind of come to university with this mentality that we are the first ones to come in this space. We are trying to, but to see actually there are people before us who did way much more than we are doing now. It really lifted them up. So back to our roots, know where you come from, and then so you know clearly where you're going.
I love that, Doctor. It's a complex one, though, isn't it? Like, know where you come from, especially when you come from a place like South Africa. And I speak about myself personally. When I think about self-pride, I have to say the pride that makes me feel the most joyous isn't kind of like the one that is closest to my nucleus in terms of like my parents. So because I come from just a melting pot of cultures, and so my Malaysian heritage is quite significant, but it doesn't give me as much pride and joy as being South African. And so that's always interesting for me. There's like the individual and then there's the collective. And I think the collective pride, like when South Africa does something great or when Africa shows up in a certain way, that collectiveness is what brings me the most joy in my life.
Yeah.
I can fully relate to that, actually, because I'm from Soweto. And a lot of people, when you ask them, so where are you from? And they say, I'm from the Eastern Cape, I'm from wherever. And when I say I'm from Soweto, people are like, yeah, but where are you from? I'm like, I'm from Soweto because that's my direct heritage. I'm from a Soweto, Mtana Sekasi, yes, Nobutleva and whatever. But that's just to say that's who I am. That's where I can relate from.
Yes.
It's a melting pot of lots of influence. Influence from Xhosa people that I've met in Soweto, Sotho people, Tswana people, Venda people. So it's all of that in one. So I'm technically South African, and that's my pride.
What do you think about that, Doctor?
There's a folk tale about a man who had two sons, and then he disappeared, and then one son became like really successful, and one son it really failed dismally. And both of them, when they were asked, like, what made you so successful? And he said, it's because of my father. And the other one as well, what made you like fail so? And then he said, because of my father.
Yes.
So it does this. So as much as it's important to know where you come from, you still have the responsibility to treat that history. It's still up to you how you treat that history, of where you to come from. So there is that responsibility. So it doesn't matter if you come from Julius Lalina, where I come from, or Soweto. It doesn't. You can still take pride in that, and it can still shape the person that you are. If you have a vision, can still get to the vision that you want to get about yourself.
Tumi, where do you think these inadequacies come from?
I think it comes from all the influences that we have, because we tend to assume that things are a certain way and it's black and white, there's no gray area, forgetting the amount of influence that comes into that. So moments where people feel like because I'm a girl from Soweto, I should not be proud enough to, show my face in certain spaces, whereas that is actually what you should be proud about because you're different. The joy is in our difference.
Doctor, I'd love to ask you this question. I find, the typical South African so maybe the word typical is not the right word, but the South African that can afford to travel, we're often traveling overseas as opposed to visiting our own continent.
Yeah.
How do we begin to see more of Africa, to trust more of Africa, to blend in more into Africa because there's a difference between celebrating Heritage Day as a South African and now Africa Day. How do we marry that?
We just have to take a decision. We just have to be conscious about it and just mean it. Like, if you look at the traveling opportunities that you have and take a decision that I'm going to do 2 African countries a year and 1 Euro, or balance, because it's important, not just, it's still important to go overseas and all that, because it still opens you up. But I think it's really important, especially for South Africans with the recent history we've had with things like xenophobic attacks and all that. And I think it does, yes, there are the economic and political things, but also I think it does stem from not traveling enough as Africans, and just feel what it's like to be in another African country and see how you received there and all that. So I think if we do that and make a conscious decision to go to Lesotho, go to Botswana, go to Mozambique, and you'll be so surprised. So my research, my PhD study was actually on the Xhosa people in Zimbabwe, and people did not know about this, but when I traveled and while I was there, I realized that there are Xhosa people in Zimbabwe, who went there in the 1800s. Xhosa people in Botswana, AmaXhosa in Lesotho, AmaXhosa in Zambia, and so many other places. So those are the things that we don't know. I think we always make us scared of the other. So I think traveling, yes, very important. Make a conscious decision.
I like
go
that.
See an African country.
I like that. Make a conscious decision to go and see an African country. Thank you so much, guys. Pride represents our dignity. Pride represents our self-respect. And no matter how challenging life can be, it's so important to remember that everything we need is within us, and it's enough to make anyone proud. After the break, we catch up with Majozi, and you don't want to miss this one, guys.